Welcome back to the fourth and final episode of The Road to 2026, where today we'll be discussing the most radical overhaul of the chassis regulations in recent times.
These rules have been a few years in the making. They started in the power unit world with a completely different approach, and those changes have quite significant impact on what we now have to cope with in the chassis world.
This fundamental change to the power unit means that we have to completely rewrite what the chassis means. And these two changes happening at the same time is the biggest change that we've seen as a sport in a very long time. So this is quite a big impact on the whole of our business. These chassis are going to be smaller, they're going to be lighter, and as a result, hopefully we will have more agile racing and closer racing, which will hopefully make the sport more exciting to watch.
In Formula One, there is a rule that says that the cars must not be lighter than a certain amount. That minimum weight has gradually got heavier and heavier and heavier, and the sport is making a very conscious effort to try to reverse that change. The minimum weight limit is reducing by 30 kilos. And in fact, you don't just have to find 30 kilos of savings, you have to go more than that because you have to have some margin for error and you have to have some ability to then develop the car in the season. So actually, you're looking for far more than 30 kilos. For most of the history of this sport, the distance between the front and rear axle was actually not regulated. But for the first time in 2022, they introduced a maximum wheelbase for the first time. And for 2026, they've taken that a step further. So this wheelbase is actually now going to be a full 20 centimeters shorter. That might not sound a lot, but to package the gearbox, the hydraulics, the power unit, all the cooling system, all the pipes, all the everything under that sleek bodywork, that 20 centimeter reduction is a big deal. They're making the cars a lot narrower, reducing the width from left to right of the car by 10 centimeters. There is the hope that this will produce a more attractive racing spectacle because there will be more space for the cars to get into battle with one another.
So we've got these smaller and lighter cars, which is great for hopefully better on-track racing, but smaller and lighter cars also means that we've reduced the drag.
There is less wing area, there's less surface area under the car. All of that just means less aerodynamic drag. But the rules haven't just done that. They've made it smaller and introduced a new feature, which is the active aerodynamics, the so-called straight line mode.
So this straight line mode will activate on far more straights than we have for the DRS, which means that actually cars will be able to go faster down these straights than they would do because they are shedding this drag. If you reduce the frontal area, you also reduce the downforce available. So then we go into what's called cornering mode, which is where the straight line mode deactivates. And that means that we have the downforce back in the corner, which holds the cars to the roads.
The sport's introduced this new lexicon of straight line mode, of cornering mode. All the cars that we watch and enjoy, those cars have always been in cornering mode. That just means a normal car. In the last few years, we've had this thing we call DRS, the drag reduction system, which is the wing that which flips up at the back. And we've gifted that only to the car that is trying to overtake. For that car, when it's in DRS mode, that's sort of like this new term straight line mode.
Yeah.
The difference is not only are all cars given this flip up rear wing on all straights, but they're allowed it for pretty much the whole straight. And that brings another change to the sport because in the current world, when the DRS flips up, the car is going at a fair lick. It already has loads and loads of downforce on it, so it doesn't really notice particularly the loss of downforce that comes when that rear wing flicks up. But if you start much earlier on the straight, which is what these new rules will do to give us less drag for longer and on every straight, then at the point where that wing flips up, the car does not have this huge surfeit of downforce to keep it stable. And so in order to make sure that the car stays balanced, it doesn't just lose a huge chunk of its rear downforce, but still pinned on the front axle, the front wing is also going to reduce. The whole car's downforce reduces, the whole car's drag reduces, but it stays balanced. So the car will feel lighter and a bit less pinned on the road, but it won't feel particularly nervous at one end or the other because it will stay balanced.
So now all of the cars have this straight line mode on the straights, which means that actually, whilst everything is more efficient now, how are we going to go about overtaking if DRS has been taken away?
We don't have DRS, but we do have, for the first time, an official overtake button. The teams have always run different strategies that enable them to lean harder on the electrical side of the car if they've got battery to do so, which will allow the car to give its best efforts of power for a brief period where when you press it, the power unit will give you its best.
And the power unit has much more electricity in 2026 than it has done so far.
Yeah, and so peak power in this power unit is really a thing of some fearsome beauty. When you press that button, if there's juice in the battery, then boy oh boy, you will get a lot of power for the brief period that that juice remains. If there is that juice in the battery and your fellow competitor has maybe used their battery in a less judicious fashion, then you can generate really very large discrepancies in power. The hope is that this differential management of electrical energy with the use of the overtake button will prove a more exciting and less contrived version of overtaking.
And I guess it makes it much more strategic then in terms of how you're deploying all of your energy, because it's not just on the straights when you get DRS and you can overtake. Indeed, you can overtake anywhere you fancy as long as you're prepared and you've got the power that you need.
Yeah, and I would predict that all of the talk is going to be about energy management and about the strategy behind energy management, because the power unit has this very, very high peak power.
Yeah.
When the internal combustion engine is on full song and the battery is juiced and the electrical motor is giving it full beans, there is a lot more power than today's cars. But that does not last forever. The batteries will drain very rapidly, and then the car needs to start charging itself back up again. This happens multiple times per lap, and so managing the way in which you spend that energy, spending it optimally in the right places around the lap so that you don't leave yourself a sitting duck at other parts of the lap, that is going to be the central challenge of going racing in 2026. We always get excited about performance. It's the sort of thing that makes the heart beat faster in our world. And we've talked mostly about that, but in every rule change, there is always a consideration of trying to make the sport safer. And 2026 is no different, with some fairly significant changes to the impact structures.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, a lot of the tests over the years have got more stringent. We included the halos, and we have several tons that go into the side of the chassis as part of the testing before we're allowed to even take them to a racetrack. But that's increasing even further. The nature of the side penetration test is not just brute force now, but actually how the carbon is impacted, which is going to make it safer for all those kind of side collisions, T-bones that we've started to see. And the other thing that's changing is thinking about nose impacts. Historically, a nose crushes when it hits a barrier, which is great if you hit a barrier straight on. But again, we see many crashes where side impacts happen. Someone hits the barrier slightly obliquely and the nose snaps off. So the test is now changing so that instead of just a front impact test, you're looking at what happens when the front's already snapped off, and can you still sustain enough impact into the wall.
On the survival cell, the challenge we've given our composite designers is go and figure out how to cope with this considerably more stringent squeeze tests and penetration tests. And by the way, save several kilos on the chassis while you're at it.
So we've talked about the chassis and the fact that it's getting shorter and narrower and lighter, but it's not just the chassis that's changing, is it? We've also got these tyres which are changing. They're becoming narrower front and rear, they're becoming lighter. And we talk a lot about tyre strategy at the moment in terms of what happened in a race. What kind of things is that going to mean going into 2026?
Formula One has always been an open-wheeled series, which means, we get to see the full round tyre out in the air. But the downside of having an open-wheeled formula is the tyre is a very draggy object. It's a bit of a barn door for the oncoming air. If we make the tyres smaller, they will produce less drag. But smaller also means less rubber. And it's the rubber that does all the hard work of turning the performance of the power unit, the skill of the driver, and the downforce that the chassis folk have put into the car. It's the tyre that transmits all of that to the asphalt. Each bit of the rubber will have to do more work. And that probably means that each bit of the rubber will be hotter. And if you're a fan of the sport now, you know that we never shut up about tyre temperatures.
Yes.
And I suspect this will also be a thing in 2026. These new rules are a huge change for all of us, a complete clean slate for the chassis. And while we have spent this session talking about the strategy behind the rules, the intent behind the rules and what it delivers for the sport, we're interested in making the fastest car we possibly can within that rule set. If the rules deliver on their objectives for the sport, great. But what we want to do is make sure that our car is the one at the leading edge of that pack, the one that is going to be taking the flag. That's the part we're in, trying to make sure every day at work we are looking for the opportunity in the rules so that we deliver a car that at that first race has a chance of winning and then a chance to propel us to a championship in 2026.